In May 1993, the early morning fog blanketed the roads around Dawsonville, Georgia. The first sounds of the season's cicadas blended with the distant rumble of truck engines, an apparently normal morning until 12-year-old Harper Dalton vanished on her way to school. Her red backpack, the small object carrying her childhood dreams, would become the symbol of a case that haunted the entire state of Georgia for 15 years. When the sun set that day, police had erected roadblocks, K-9 units were combing the woods, and a mother stood by the roadside, clutching her daughter's photo until her hands bled. No one knew that from that moment, a long, arduous journey had begun. A journey to find the truth amidst a dark web of lies and guilt. In the initial days, rumors spread everywhere. A man in a light-colored pickup truck, a handwritten note urging a search at Lake Lanier, and faint clues that all eventually led to dead ends. The case went cold, the file gathered dust, until a GBI lieutenant, William Garvey, accidentally discovered a residual piece of denim fabric in the old backpack. From there, layers of secrets were gradually peeled back: the anonymous letter, a faded Polaroid photo in an old drawer, and a chain of clandestine transactions between a police officer and the suspected neighbor. But what lay behind the disappearance was more horrific than the crime itself. It was the silence of a small community afraid to confront the truth. The silence of those in power who had sworn to uphold justice. And when the truth was finally unearthed, it not only clarified the fate of a 12-year-old girl, but also exposed the dark underbelly of the system that had allowed her to be forgotten for too long. This is not just a story about a cold case being solved. It is a wake-up call for America today, that justice may be delayed, but it is never gone. Stay with me as we return to Dawsonville in 1993, where the red backpack abandoned by the roadside opened up one of the most chilling and shocking cold cases in the American South. Before we delve deeper into this true shocking story, please let us know where you are watching from. And if you love journeys that uncover forgotten justice, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. The summer morning in 1993, Dawsonville, Georgia, was shrouded in a thin mist, the air still heavy with the scent of pine sap from the trees along the road. The first sounds of the season's cicadas echoed from afar, blending with the intermittent roar of a few trucks traveling the main avenue. Harper Lee Dalton, the 12-year-old girl, left her small wooden house at the end of Maple Street just after 7:30. On her shoulder was her worn red backpack, holding her extra school notebooks and a few small personal items. In her left hand, Harper carried the metal lunchbox her mother had prepared, peanut butter sandwich, and thin slices of apple, which she always brought every morning. Her mother, Linda Dalton, dressed in her town diner uniform, stood on the porch, calling out instructions, telling her to go straight to school and avoid crossing the empty market area. Harper turned back, smiled, and quickly ran down the small slope leading to the main road. The narrow paved road was lined with faded wooden fences. The mist reflected the faint light of the rising sun. A few local residents saw her pass the old warehouse near the Texaco gas station. One person recounted that the girl stopped for a few seconds, looked toward the parking lot where a light-colored pickup truck was parked, then continued walking. After that, no one saw Harper again. The morning passed quietly. No one in the town knew that this was the start of a long silence. When the morning classes ended, the teacher noted Harper's unexcused absence. The school called home, but Linda was on her work shift, so no one answered. By noon, a classmate mentioned that Harper had not come to school that day. When Linda returned home, everything was as it should be. Harper's shoes were by the door, the bed neatly folded, no sign that the girl had returned. A sense of unease made her leave the house immediately, driving the route Harper took to school every day. She stopped at every street corner, dropped by the market, asked the vendors, and then went to the gas station near the warehouse area. No one knew anything. The further she went, the greater Linda's fear grew. In the late afternoon, she called a few acquaintances in town, asking them to keep an eye out, then returned home in a state of distress. When the sun set, the light completely gone behind the western hills, Linda decided to go to the Dawsonville Police Department. She carried a photo of Harper taken the year before, wearing a white shirt, hair tied back, with an innocent smile. In the duty room, the fluorescent light shone on her distraught face, her voice trembling as she reported. Her daughter had not returned home after leaving for school that morning. Immediately after Linda Dalton reported her daughter missing, the Dawsonville Police Department deployed a search team. The news quickly spread throughout the usually peaceful small town, leaving residents both stunned and worried. The 1st Patrol Unit scoured the residential area around the Dalton house, setting up a perimeter along Maple Street and the area near the Texaco gas station, where Harper was last seen. Police officers knocked on every door, questioning every resident. Most only vaguely remembered seeing the girl walking to school in the morning. No one saw anything unusual. The next morning, the search expanded into a town-wide operation. Dozens of volunteers, students, store employees and local residents participated. A large map was spread on the conference room table, marked with red pins indicating the areas to be searched. 2 K9 units were brought in from Gainesville, starting to track Harper's scent from a nightgown Linda provided. Both followed the scent quickly, but when they reached the turnoff to the highway, they stopped, barked softly, and circled back. The trail ended there. Police marked the suspicious area, setting up a temporary checkpoint to check passing vehicles. Meanwhile, other groups continued to sweep the route Harper usually took to school, checking the park, the edge of the woods, the old market, and along the shore of Lake Lanier. In the afternoon, a search team found the first piece of evidence, Harper's metal lunchbox lying by the roadside, about 2 miles from home. The lid had a fresh scratch, the latch was open, and inside there was still half of the peanut butter sandwich and slices of apple that had turned brown. There were no signs of a struggle or blood, just a few broken blades of grass and a slight skid mark on the ground. The scene was immediately secured, and forensic personnel took photos and collected soil samples for analysis. Police Chief Garrett Sims ordered the search radius to be expanded by 5 miles around the lunchbox location. A team of divers checked the drainage ditch area near the lake, but found nothing. By the afternoon, local news broadcasts began covering the disappearance, publishing Harper's photo along with an appeal to the community for information. Linda sat at the temporary checkpoint, silently staring at the map and waiting for every new call, her face drawn from exhaustion after 2 days without sleep. On the 3rd day, the investigation team retrieved an old camera tape from the Texaco gas station. The image was blurry, but showed Harper walking through the parking lot around 7:45 a.m. In the corner of the frame, the shadow of a light-colored pickup truck briefly appeared, then disappeared from the camera's view. That was the only detail that could confirm the last time the girl was seen. The Dawsonville police reported to the state level, requesting assistance from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation (GBI). 2 days later, Lieutenant William Garvey, a seasoned investigator specializing in missing person cases, was dispatched to the town. He spent the first night reviewing all statements, comparing time markers and concluded, Harper disappeared in a 20-minute window between 7:45 a.m. and 8:05 a.m. that morning. The next morning, Garvey and the police chief returned to the scene where the lunchbox was found. He closely examined the scratch marks, the direction of the skid marks, and noted briefly, no struggle, no drag marks, likely taken by vehicle. Immediately after, he ordered a complete sweep of all routes leading out of town, checking every light-colored truck that had been in the area. At the same time, volunteer groups continued to search the woods and the lake edge, but found no further clues. 3 days after the disappearance, Dawsonville gradually fell into silence. Flyers with Harper's photo were posted along the roads, the edges of the paper gently flapping in the wind. Garvey stood in front of the grassy area, where the lunchbox was found, his eyes fixed on the empty road. No sign of violence, no specific witnesses, just a sudden gap between 2 points, where a child vanished without a trace. On the 4th morning of the search, the atmosphere in Dawsonville grew tense. Dozens of volunteers continued to comb every area around Highway 9, but Harper's trace still hadn't appeared. Lieutenant William Garvey, recently assigned by the GBI, decided to change the search direction. He divided the team into small groups, sectioning off the area based on a radius from where the lunchbox was found, focusing particularly on the vacant lot behind the Dawson truck stop, where many trucks parked overnight. As soon as dawn broke, Officer Neal's team, along with 2 volunteers, entered the area. The ground was still wet from the previous night's rain, mixed with tire tracks and messy footprints. Following the steel fence at the corner of the lot, Neal spotted a patch of red fabric standing out among the damp grass. Getting closer, he realized it was the student's backpack. The strap was broken, the backpack body was muddy, and one side of the flap was torn. He immediately radioed in, requesting the scene be kept intact. Lieutenant Garvey and the forensics team arrived shortly after. He secured the area within a 50-meter radius, asking the trucks to leave to avoid disturbing the evidence. The backpack was placed on a clean plastic sheet, photographed from every angle before being opened. Inside, the technical team recovered 3 items: a rain-soaked sketchbook, 2 broken pencils, and a small piece of dark blue denim fabric. The sketchbook had the name Harper Dalton written in blue ink, the handwriting slightly slanted. A few pages were torn, but children's drawings, a house, a cat, the Dawsonville market, were still visible. Garvey examined the denim fabric closely. It was frayed at the edges, with a white thread border, and a thick fabric structure, more similar to the material used for car seats than clothing. He numbered the sample and placed it in an evidence bag. Forensics noted the backpack was located about 300 meters from the main road, near an area where container trucks usually turned around. No blood, no torn items, but large-sized men's footprints were mixed in the fresh mud, and the broken strap suggested the backpack might have been thrown from a vehicle. At noon, Garvey gathered the investigation team in the police station's temporary conference room. The town map was spread out, marking 2 points, where the lunchbox was found, and where the backpack was recovered. He used a ruler to measure the distance, nearly 3 miles, matching the distance a car could travel in 10 minutes. The girl did not walk there herself, he stated, concluding this was a deliberate kidnapping. Garvey ordered a list to be made of everyone present around the truck stop that morning. Convenience store employees, regular resting drivers, the night security guard, and neighboring residents. The initial list had over 20 people. A few witnesses remembered seeing a light-colored pickup truck leave the lot around 8 o'clock that morning, but did not recall the license plate. A gas station employee claimed to have seen a man with a beard, wearing a gray t-shirt, driving an old Ford, but could not confirm the exact time. Soil samples from the scene were sent for analysis. The denim fabric was prioritized for analysis, as it potentially came from a car's interior, a rare detail that could help identify the vehicle type. Garvey requested technicians to cross-reference it with the state's interior material database. In the afternoon, the forensics team returned to the scene to check the tire tracks. The mud preserved a double serrated pattern, a common type for small pickup trucks. The tire tracks headed straight out onto Highway 9, the only road leading out of town. Garvey closely observed and noted, no struggle, no drag marks. The victim was likely taken by car. That evening, he began creating a preliminary timeline. 7:30 a.m., Harper left home. 7:45 a.m., seen at Texaco. 8 a.m., vanished completely. Day 1, lunchbox found 2 miles from home. Day 4, backpack appeared at the truck stop, 3 miles from the first spot. The distance and time created a logical sequence of movement, only possible with a motor vehicle. Garvey circled the vacant lot between the 2 locations, an area that hadn't been thoroughly searched, a narrow trail cutting through the pine forest, connecting Texaco to the truck lot. He suspected this was the path the perpetrator had taken. That night, as the search teams returned, Garvey sat alone in the command room, staring at the map crisscrossed with red lines. The few meager clues, the lunchbox, the backpack, the denim fabric, were all they had after 4 days. No sign of violence, no clear witnesses, just objects left behind in a calculated manner. Garvey understood that someone had been watching Harper, knew her routine path every morning, and even knew where she would pause. And if that was true, this was no longer a random missing persons case, but a premeditated act. A plan executed by someone who knew every road, every habit of the child. 2 days after the red backpack was found, the investigation shifted focus to identifying a suspect. Lieutenant William Garvey reviewed the witness statements around the Texaco and the truck stop parking lot. A woman who owned a general store said that on the morning Harper went missing, she saw the girl standing next to a light-colored pickup truck, talking to the man inside. She couldn't hear clearly, only remembering that the truck had a tow hitch on the back. This description matched the blurry image on the Texaco surveillance tape, the light-colored pickup truck that appeared briefly at 7:45 in the morning. Garvey requested a check of the registration list for similar vehicles within a 10-mile radius. The list was narrowed down to 8 owners, including Brian West, a 25-year-old mechanic who lived near Linda Dalton's home. He owned a 1990 beige Ford F-150, the same model described by the witness. People in the neighborhood all knew Brian. He lived alone, kept to himself, and often worked on cars late into the night. Garvey decided to approach him. That afternoon, he and Sheriff Garrett Sims went to Brian's garage. He was changing a tire on an old sedan, looking thin, with short hair and a gray t-shirt stained with engine oil. When the missing case was mentioned, Brian appeared calm, even slightly indifferent. He claimed he left home at 8:30 that morning, went to an auto parts store a few miles away to buy oil, and then drove straight to work. Garvey asked to check the vehicle. The F-150 was parked right next to the garage, its exterior covered in fresh mud, but the interior was unusually clean. Forensics noted a blue fiber stuck between the back seats. The sample was collected and sent to the lab. The preliminary result: the fiber was the same type as the denim fragment in Harper's backpack, but it couldn't be definitively confirmed as the same source. Garvey compared the tire tracks, finding a similar dual lug pattern to the one at the truck stop scene, only slightly different in wear. These details were insufficient to apply for an arrest or search warrant. The next day, Brian was invited to the police station for a formal interrogation. He showed up on time, without an attorney. When Garvey asked about the witness who saw him talking to Harper, Brian replied that there are dozens of trucks like mine in this town. When asked why his truck appeared near the Texaco that morning, Brian claimed he stopped to get gas on his way. However, the auto parts store receipt he submitted was time-stamped 9:22 a.m., nearly an hour later than his statement. He explained that he had stopped at a coffee shop but couldn't remember the name, and had no one to confirm it. The interrogation lasted 2 hours with no progress. Brian remained composed, not defensive, answering briefly, and always maintaining a cold gaze. Garvey noted, not fearful, good emotional control, signs of concealment. He instructed the police to secretly monitor him and recheck his criminal record. The results showed Brian had been arrested in 1991 for harassing a woman in Gainesville Park, but the case was dropped when the victim withdrew the complaint. Garvey met with the owner of the garage where Brian worked. The owner stated that on the day Harper disappeared, Brian arrived nearly an hour late and left the workshop earlier than usual. He offered no explanation and had his answering machine turned on all morning. All of this led Garvey to believe Brian was involved, but he couldn't press charges. He presented the findings at the GBI meeting: matching evidence type, plausible travel time, a witness matching the description, and a suspect with a suspicious history. However, due to the lack of direct evidence, the warrant to search his home and vehicle was denied. Brian was released the same day. Garvey watched the beige F-150 roll out of the parking lot, a feeling of unease rising within him. He believed the man knew more than he had said. In his end-of-day report, Garvey wrote, "Brian West, continue surveillance, possibly directly involved in the disappearance of Harper Dalton." The late afternoon brought a light rain, water spilling onto Maple Street, reflecting the blurred yellow lights. In the small garage at the end of the street, Brian's pickup truck sat silently under the awning, the mud on its tires still fresh. No one noticed the young man packing up his tools, closing up earlier than usual. Meanwhile, Garvey, in his office filled with the smell of damp paper, continued to review the map and the red pins connecting Harper's last known route. Each small detail began to suggest a familiar image, someone with the opportunity, the means, and the reason to hide a child. A week after interrogating Brian West, Harper Dalton's missing case seemed to stall until a strange event occurred. Early on the morning of July 29th, the duty officer at the Dawsonville Police Department found a brown envelope placed in front of the door, with no stamp, no sender, only the scribbled words, "For GBI, U. Argent." The envelope was immediately transferred to Lieutenant William Garvey. Inside was a sheet of paper folded into thirds, faintly smelling of perfume. The only line of text, "Look by Lake Lanier." Below it was a crude, hand-drawn map, circling the northern shore of the lake, the location of an old abandoned pier. There was no signature, no other explanation. Garvey examined the paper carefully. The handwriting slanted to the left, slightly shaky and uneven, seemingly written in haste. Either someone knows something, or someone wants us to waste time, he assessed, but ordered a check nonetheless. That afternoon, the GBI dive and rescue team was dispatched to the area marked on the map. The abandoned pier was overgrown with weeds, the lake water murky and deep. Sonar scanned the entire lake bottom around the marked area, but detected no suspicious objects. On shore, only a few cigarette butts, bottle caps, and fragments of decaying cloth that had been there for longer than 6 months were found. After 3 hours of searching, Garvey ordered a conclusion. He stood silent at the water's edge, looking at the flat lake surface reflecting the afternoon light. If someone sent this letter, they want us to believe the girl is here. But I don't believe it. The letter was sent to the GBI lab in Atlanta for examination. Results showed it was ordinary paper, bought at a stationery store in Dawsonville. Handwriting analysis concluded the writer was female, left-handed, aged about 30-40, with an average level of education. No fingerprints were found, but the trace of lavender scent on the paper suggested the sender used a common perfume, or it was just the smell from laundry detergent. Garvey read the report, deep in thought. He requested a review of all women living around the Lanier area, and those who had been in contact with the Dalton family. No one matched the description. Linda Dalton affirmed she had never received a letter, or heard anyone mention the lake. "I don't know who would do such a thing," she said, her eyes deeply sunken from lack of sleep. Garvey began to suspect someone was deliberately interfering, misdirecting the investigation. That evening, he met with Sheriff Garrett Sims. "If this is a real lead, why hide the name? And if it's fake, this person knows exactly what we are doing." Sims agreed, suggesting the sender must be involved or closely following the case. Garvey decided to keep the information secret. Only a few people in the team were allowed access to the original. However, the news of the mystery letter still leaked out. A short article in the Dawson County Journal describing the search at Lake Lanier caused locals to flock to the area, forcing the police to blockade the location. Garvey was angry, but couldn't control the source of the leak. He realized the case was now not just an internal investigation but a story the whole town was following. An ideal environment for an information manipulator. Meanwhile, the handwriting lab continued its deeper analysis. A specialist discovered that the letters L and K in the phrase, "Look by Lake Lanier," had a characteristic connection stroke of someone trained in Southern script, deliberately distorted to create an unfamiliar appearance. A specialist commented, "This person knows how to disguise their real handwriting." Garvey had copies of the samples sent to the FBI to cross-reference with previous anonymous letter cases recorded in the area. Late at night, he sat in his office, the light reflecting on the crumpled piece of paper. The 3 short words, "Look by Lake Lanier," haunted him. Why Lake Lanier? Someone was trying to make the police believe Harper was underwater, while all evidence pointed to a truck kidnapping. He thought of Brian West, the light-colored pickup, the vague timeline, the unusually calm demeanor. Could the letter be his way of covering his tracks? Garvey folded the paper, put it into a sealed envelope, and noted in his journal, "Anonymous source, high probability of interference. Do not rule out the sender having direct contact with the suspect." He instructed investigators to continue to monitor Brian covertly, while also warning everyone not to disclose any more information externally. Outside, the night wind from Lake Lanier blew cold through the window, the damp smell of the lake seeping into the room. Garvey stood up, looking at the map densely covered with red pins on the wall, overlapping locations, evidence, and timelines. Every clue that emerged seemed to lead him further away from the truth. And now, another mysterious letter, written by an unnamed woman, who could be a liar, or the only witness who knew where Harper was. After the anonymous letter yielded no results, the investigation into Harper Dalton's disappearance began to stagnate. Rumors spread across Dawsonville, and within days, the police received dozens of calls reporting a girl who looked like Harper in neighboring towns. A gas station attendant in Gainesville claimed to have seen a blonde girl with a strange man. In Dahlonega, a restaurant owner asserted Harper was working in the diner. Every tip was checked, and every check led to disappointment. All were mistaken identities. The police had to spend days verifying each statement. The blurry tape at the gas station only showed a family stopping for gas. The girl in Dahlonega was the owner's daughter, only matching the age. Someone even called in saying they saw Harper at the mall incoming, but when the unit arrived, the witness was not so sure. The false information exhausted the investigation team, while public opinion grew increasingly skeptical. Amidst the chaos, an anonymous source called the hotline, saying that Harper is being held in a cabin west of Lake Lanier. The GBI immediately deployed a special task force. They found an abandoned log cabin, with shoe prints and cigarette butts on the floor, but no signs of anyone living there recently. All samples were sent for examination, no fingerprints, no DNA, no match with any suspects. Meanwhile, Garvey directed a review of suspects with criminal records in the area. 4 men previously arrested for child harassment or kidnapping were interrogated. One had a solid alibi, another was under house arrest at the time of the incident. None of them were linked to Harper. Each failed investigation added to Garvey's stress, but he remained firm in his hypothesis that the girl was deliberately abducted. After more than 2 months, no further physical evidence was found. The lunchbox, backpack, and denim fragment remained the only pieces of evidence. The tire tracks at the truck stop parking lot had been washed away by rain and wind, making further analysis impossible. The lab also confirmed that the fabric fragment did not have enough DNA for cross-referencing. Even the Look by Lake Lanier letter, the clue that once drew attention, was concluded by the FBI to be irrelevant, with no handwriting match to any samples in their database. Entering the 3rd month, the press began to exert pressure. Articles in the Dawson County Journal repeatedly questioned the GBI's investigative competence, and local TV ran a special report on the unsolved mystery disappearance. Many residents believed the police were hiding information, while others blamed the Dalton family. Linda Dalton was hounded by reporters, forced to temporarily leave town and stay with her sister in Jasper. And Garvey, despite trying to remain silent, distinctly felt the looks of suspicion every time he stepped outside. Within the GBI, there was a suggestion that Harper might have run away. A temporary report noted, the possibility of voluntarily leaving home cannot be excluded. Garvey strongly objected, no child takes her lunchbox to school and then vanishes mid-route. This is an abduction, not a runaway case. But without new evidence, his view remained only a hunch. In early October, the investigation budget began to run low. Volunteer groups ceased operations, and many officers were withdrawn from the case. The map full of red pins hanging in the command room was taken down, replaced by a brief internal notice. Case status, inactive. The case was officially suspended. Garvey looked at the notice, feeling empty. In the file, Case code 93DW112 was moved to the cold case category, unsolved, no longer actively investigated. He spent the last evening reviewing all the documents, highlighting every small detail, the distance between Texaco and the truck stop, the 20 minutes the girl was out of sight, the camera light, the light-colored pickup truck. Everything was still like a puzzle with missing pieces. Before leaving the office, he taped Harper's photo back onto the bulletin board, a picture of the girl smiling in her red uniform, with clear, innocent eyes. Below the photo, he added one line in pencil, "Still missing." The next day, the file was sealed. Dawsonville gradually returned to its normal rhythm. But for Garvey, the case never truly ended. In his notebook, the last page was still blank, waiting for a new clue, no matter how small, to reopen the story of the 12-year-old girl who vanished on a summer morning in 1993. In early 1995, nearly 2 years after Harper Dalton disappeared, the case was officially classified as a cold case in the GBI system. Case file number 93DW112 was transferred to the Dawsonville Police Department's archive, alongside hundreds of other unsolved files. The final entry in the brief summary report read, "No new evidence found, no additional witnesses. Recommend temporary suspension of investigation until viable DNA data or tracing technology becomes available." As the file was closed, the town of Dawsonville had almost forgotten the story of the blonde-haired girl who vanished on her way to school. The search flyers were taken down, and the missing sign on the post office faded under rain and sun. The Dalton family tried to move on, and those who had participated in the search gradually mentioned Harper's name less often. Only Lieutenant William Garvey could not let go. After the case was moved to cold status, he requested to be relieved of some other duties to spend time reviewing the entire file. On Garvey's desk, the map of Dawsonville still hung, with 2 red pushpins marking the Texaco and the truck stop, where all traces of Harper ended. He reviewed every photograph, every lab report. Many pages were yellowed, and some reports were blurry due to being printed on the cheap paper of the early 90s. Around the same time, Brian West, the neighbor who had been investigated, left Dawsonville without warning. His residency file noted he moved to Greenville, South Carolina, opened a small garage, and changed his license plates. The departure occurred just weeks after the case was closed. No one noticed except Garvey. He noted in his notebook, "West left the state, needs follow-up." But when he sent a request for cooperation, the Greenville Police Department refused to conduct surveillance because there was no legal basis. Worse, an internal audit that year found that several pieces of evidence in the Harper Dalton case had gone missing. The denim fabric swatch, the hair fiber collected from the backpack, and even the single original copy of the Texaco surveillance tape had all disappeared from the evidence storage facility. The internal investigation report cited the cause as improper storage procedure due to staff changes and the reorganization of old files. When Garvey heard the news, he was almost in disbelief. "We lost the very things that could help her be found." From then on, he began keeping his own copy of the case file, including crime scene photos, maps and original notes from the investigator's notebook. No longer having direct access to the GBI file, Garvey quietly continued to monitor the case. Every time he heard about a missing person case in the Southeast, he compared the description with Harper Dalton. Many nights, he sat alone in his old office, replaying the backup copy of the Texaco camera footage, the blurry image of the girl in a red uniform shirt, walking in the early morning sun, and the fleeting shadow of a light-colored vehicle passing behind her. No matter how many times he watched it, he could never identify the license plate or the driver's face. Years passed, forensic technology advanced, but no one mentioned file number 93DW112 anymore. Every year, on July 19th, Garvey called Linda Dalton, just to ask the familiar question, "Have you heard anything new?" Linda always replied softly, "No, Mr. Garvey, but I'm still hoping." By the end of 1995, he officially retired from field duty, moving to an administrative oversight division of the GBI. But in his desk drawer, he still kept a thin file folder wrapped in a clear plastic sleeve. Inside was Harper's photograph, and his first pencil-written note: no physical trace, likely intentional abduction. Suspect Brian West. Many of his new colleagues did not know the story. They only saw Garvey occasionally sitting in silent contemplation, looking at the old map, as if he was still tracking something unfinished. For him, the Harper Dalton case was never over, it was only closed on paper. In his mind, Garvey still believed that somewhere out there, someone knew the truth, and with just one small piece of evidence, this cold case would be reopened once again. In 2001, nearly 8 years after Harper Dalton disappeared, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation (GBI) established a cold case unit to review unsolved cases from the 80s and 90s. Lieutenant William Garvey, then 56, was invited back as an investigative consultant. In the initial list, he recognized the familiar case number 93, DW 112, Harper Lee Dalton, Dawson County, Georgia. Garvey did not hesitate. After years of only quietly following the case, he finally had the official chance to reopen the investigation that had haunted him. When he stepped into the GBI archive in Atlanta, he retrieved the thin file folder, which had a note on the cover: missing original evidence, 5 secondary samples remaining. Among them was the denim fabric swatch found in Harper's backpack, now faded, but still sealed in its evidence bag. For Garvey, this was the only starting point. He spent the first few days reviewing every remaining piece of evidence: photos of the backpack, a copy of the metal lunchbox, the VHS tape from the Texaco station, and witness statements. Forensic technology was far more advanced than it had been in 1993. Garvey submitted a request to the GBI Technical Lab in Macon, asking for an infrared spectroscopy (FTIR) analysis of the fabric swatch to determine its origin and material application. 3 weeks later, the results stunned him. Denim sample contained synthetic polyester fibers, a 4x1 weave structure, commonly used in Ford and General Motors vehicle interiors during the 1989-1992 period. Garvey requested a deeper analysis. The supplemental report confirmed fiber structure, dye color and flame retardant coating are a 99% match for the seat fabric of a 1989-1992 Ford F-150 truck, manufactured at the Dearborn plant. Garvey's heart sank. Brian West, the neighbor who was once the primary suspect, owned that exact model, a 1990 beige Ford F-150. He recalled the image of the unusually clean truck, the blue fiber trapped in the back seat, and Brian's nonchalant expression during the interrogation. At the time, technology was insufficient to prove anything, but now, everything was clearer. Garvey immediately compiled the evidence he had retained: crime scene photos of the truck stop, witness testimonies, a copy of the Texaco surveillance tape. He compared the timelines and routes, all consistent with the possibility of Harper being abducted and driven away in the truck. In his internal report, he wrote, "The denim swatch is a direct link between the victim's evidence and the suspect's vehicle. Recommend full reinvestigation." An emergency meeting was held at GBI headquarters. Garvey presented the new findings to the team of young investigators. He projected photos of the fabric swatch, the spectroscopy results, and a picture of 12-year-old Harper with her red backpack onto the screen. The room fell silent. "We missed this chance 8 years ago," he said, "but now, we have the tools to correct that mistake." The captain asked, "Are you certain the fabric belongs to that specific vehicle line?" Garvey answered definitively, "I am. Not just the same type, the same production year." And West was the only one in the area who owned a 1990 F-150 model. However, there was a major obstacle. Brian West's truck had been sold in 1996 to a scrap metal dealer in South Carolina and subsequently disassembled for parts. It was impossible to retrieve the physical evidence for comparison. Nevertheless, Garvey believed the discovery was strong enough to propose reopening the file. In his 8-page proposal to the GBI director, he clearly stated, Forensic results confirm the denim swatch matches the interior of a 1989-1992 Ford F-150. This model matches the vehicle once owned by suspect Brian West. The suspect left Georgia immediately after the case was closed in 1995. Some original evidence is lost, but copies and original reports still exist. Recommend reinvestigation, focusing on West's movements and contacts from 1993 to present. A week later, the Cold Case Unit officially approved the proposal. File 93DW-112 was moved from inactive to reopened status. Garvey was assigned as the lead investigator for the reinvestigation, along with 2 young associates from Atlanta. Leaving the GBI building that night, he paused by the parking lot, watching the thin rain fall on the row of parked cars. 8 years ago, he had walked away from the case with a sense of helplessness. Now in his hands was an old piece of fabric that could change everything. This time, Garvey murmured to himself, "I won't let this case sink again." After the Harper Dalton case was officially reopened, Lieutenant William Garvey decided to re-examine every old detail, starting with the anonymous letter from 1993 that read, "Look by Lake Lanier." Previously, the GBI had only determined the writer was female and left-handed, but could not find an identity. Now, with assistance from the FBI, Garvey believed the letter could be a crucial link. He sent the original letter to the FBI's Document Examination Unit at Quantico for handwriting comparison. Specialists used optical analysis techniques and penmanship comparison algorithms. A week later, the result stunned Garvey. The handwriting was a near 99% match to Cheryl West, the ex-girlfriend of Brian West, the primary suspect from years ago. Cheryl had been briefly questioned in 1993, but only as a witness. When she received the new subpoena, she was 33, living in Athens, Georgia. During the interrogation, as Garvey placed the faded old letter in front of her, Cheryl avoided his eyes. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. A long silence passed, and then she quietly nodded. "Yes, I wrote it. I just wanted to help Brian." She admitted to sending the anonymous letter, with the intention of misdirecting the investigation, because she was afraid her boyfriend would be wrongly accused. When Garvey asked why, Cheryl said that at the time Harper went missing, Brian seemed stressed, often leaving in the middle of the night. He said, "The kid's been taken somewhere else," she confessed, her voice shaking. "I didn't know what he meant, but the look in his eyes scared me." Garvey followed up, "Did you ever see Harper?" Cheryl hesitated, then whispered, "I'm not sure, but I once saw a photo." According to her, a few weeks after the disappearance, Brian brought several boxes of old photos to the garage. Among them, she briefly saw a Polaroid picture taken inside his truck. There was a blonde girl in a red uniform shirt, sitting in the back seat. When Cheryl asked, Brian simply replied, "A customer's kid." She did not dare to press further, but when she saw the missing person flyer later, she believed the girl in the photo was Harper. Brian later tore up the photo and hid all the film rolls in the trunk of his car. Garvey noted every sentence. This was the first time a witness admitted Brian had mentioned Harper and possessed her image. He had the FBI run an additional comparison with Cheryl's handwriting from old employment records, and the results fully corroborated the match. Cheryl did not deny it, only saying, "I thought if they believed the girl was at Lake Lanier, they would stop suspecting him." This information was immediately entered into the official report. Garvey documented, the author of the anonymous letter in 1993 is Cheryl West. She admitted to writing the letter to protect her boyfriend, Brian West. She testified that Brian once said the kid's been taken somewhere else. She once saw a photo of Harper inside Brian's truck. On Garvey's orders, the investigation team searched Cheryl's old house in Dawsonville, where she had lived at the time. In the attic, they discovered a wooden box containing personal items, a few faded Polaroids, one of which was taken inside a truck bed, clearly showing the blue denim seat and the corner of a red backpack on the floor. While the face was not visible, the details matched Harper's evidence. The forensics lab confirmed the film type was Polaroid 600, popular in the early 90s, perfectly aligning with the time of the case. The image of the denim seat matched the type of Ford F-150 interior fabric Garvey had just identified in the re-investigation. This was the first piece of physical evidence directly linking Harper to Brian's truck. Reviewing the photo, Garvey noticed the light in the frame came from a slightly ajar car door, as if the picture was taken in a hurry. He asked Cheryl one last time, "Do you know anything else?" Cheryl shook her head, tears falling. "I've been scared for years, but he never told me the truth." Garvey's new report was forwarded to the cold case unit director. Starting with an old letter from nearly 10 years ago, the Harper Dalton case now had testimonial and photographic evidence reinforcing suspicion against Brian West, the man who had quietly left Dawsonville and vanished from the police's radar. That evening, Garvey sat in his office, looking at the Polaroid under the yellow light. The light in the photo was faint, but he recognized the red strap of the backpack, the item that had been left by the roadside in 1993. After nearly a decade, the anonymous letter that had once sent the investigation in the wrong direction was finally decoded, and it led him right back to where he started. Brian West's light-colored truck, where the secret about Harper Dalton was still waiting to be uncovered. The Polaroid photograph found among Cheryl West's old possessions quickly became the most significant piece of evidence since the reopening of the Harper Dalton case. Garvey sent the original to the GBI Image Analysis Lab in Atlanta. Under infrared light, a faint detail became clear. A small reflection in the truck's rearview mirror contained the sequence of letters and numbers temp TN3. Garvey immediately recognized this as a temporary license plate from the state of Tennessee, the type issued to vehicles being transferred out of state. He requested enlargements of each frame, and the technician identified the first three characters as TN 347. DMV data from 1994 showed the plate belonged to a beige Ford F-150, temporarily registered in Knoxville on March 12, 1994. The owner, Brian E. West. The pickup truck, once a focal point of suspicion in the Harper Dalton case, had now surfaced in Tennessee just 1 year after the case was suspended. Garvey immediately ordered an examination of Brian's whereabouts during this period. Tax records indicated he left Georgia in early 1994, worked at a garage in suburban Knoxville for a few months, and then abruptly quit, leaving no forwarding address. From that lead, Garvey contacted Knoxville police to review reports from that time, especially those involving minors or false identities. Only 3 days later, a hospital record stunned him. On March 20, 1994, the University of Tennessee Medical Center recorded a female patient named Lydia Harmon, age 13, admitted with a sharp object wound to her right hand. The girl was brought in by an uncle named West, who presented no identification, and left immediately after the wound was bandaged. The file also contained a black and white identification photo. When Garvey opened the file, he was speechless. The girl's face, the blonde hair, the bright eyes, she was eerily similar to Harper Dalton. He sent the photo to the FBI for biometric comparison with Harper's 1993 school ID photo. The analysis confirmed a 96.4% match. Lydia Harmon was Harper Dalton. The copy of the medical record stated the girl was admitted at 9:17 p.m. with a deep wrist laceration, showing signs of panic, and remaining silent throughout the treatment. The accompanying man signed B. West on the discharge papers. When the nurse asked for a contact number, he simply said, "We don't have one." The signature was later forensically examined, and found to match Brian West's signature in Georgia vehicle purchase records perfectly. Garvey immediately understood the implication. Brian had taken Harper to Knoxville, given her a false name, and then disappeared. The girl was alive, at least as of March 1994. He called an urgent meeting. The young investigators silently looked at the photo of Harper and the hospital record placed side by side. One spoke softly, So she was still alive almost 8 months after she vanished. Garvey replied slowly, yes, and Brian is the only one who knows what happened next. He and the task force returned to Knoxville to collect more data. 2 nurses on duty that night were still employed there. One clearly remembered, the girl was panicked, clutching my hand the whole time. When I asked if she wanted to call her parents, the man next to her stopped me and said, no need, we're traveling far away. Both confirmed the man drove a light-colored pickup, spoke with a southern accent, and had a short beard, a description matching Brian West. The technical team compared the Polaroid photo with the hospital photo. In the Polaroid, the corner of a red backpack appeared on the blue denim seat, a detail that perfectly matched the description in the missing person file. When the 2 photos were placed together, Garvey noticed the light in the vehicle's reflected mirror was directed at a sign that read Knoxville Auto, consistent with the area of the garage where Brian had worked. All the clues were connecting the Tennessee temporary tag, the F-150 truck, Cheryl West's testimony, and now the hospital record of Lydia Harmon. Garvey wrote in his internal report, Harper Dalton was alive in Knoxville in March 1994. She was taken to the hospital by Brian West under a false name. Brian's F-150 truck was confirmed to be in Tennessee at the same time. As night fell, Garvey sat alone in his office, looking at the 2 photographs, Harper in 1993 and Lydia Harmon in 1994, taped side by side on his investigation board. Below them he wrote in red pen, she survived, and he took her. After 8 years, the missing person case that seemed closed was opening a new chapter. An old Polaroid, a faint mirror reflection, and a forgotten hospital record had all led Garvey to one undeniable conclusion. Harper Dalton had lived, had been taken through Tennessee, and Brian West was the person who took her. The investigation results from the Knoxville hospital records confirmed, Lydia Harmon was merely a false identity created by Brian West to conceal Harper Dalton's true identity. No birth certificate, school record, or legal document existed under this name. All traces stemmed from Brian's handwriting, the same signature style, the same scrawl on the forms. After leaving Knoxville at the end of 1994, Brian lived under the name David Harmon, renting a small wooden house in the city's western suburbs. Neighbors recounted, he lived with a niece around 13 or 14 years old, a skinny blonde girl who rarely went outside. The girl was well behaved. She mostly just sat drawing by the window, one person said. No one knew what the uncle did. He kept the door locked all the time. According to bank statements, in December 1994, Brian withdrew all his savings and vanished from Tennessee. The last money trail led to Portland, Oregon, in early 1995. From there, all traces of both of them changed completely. Garvey collaborated with the FBI and Oregon police to track back using the names David and Lydia Harmon. The Oregon Department of Revenue confirmed in 1996, Brian, now using the name David Harmon, worked at a lumber mill in Portland for nearly 3 years. Simultaneously, a new student named Lydia D. Harmon, born in 1981, appeared in the records of Forest Park High School, with an address matching Brian's boarding house. The girl was only present for 1 school year, then suddenly disappeared from the roster without a transfer record or reason for withdrawal. A class group photo was recovered. When the technical team compared it with the photo of Harper Dalton taken in 1993, the match was over 90%. Garvey was certain Harper had lived in Portland until at least age 15. He and his investigation team traveled to Oregon to interview witnesses. The former principal of Forest Park High School recalled, Lydia was quiet, good at drawing, often sat alone. She said she lived with her uncle, who worked at a lumber mill. One morning, neither of them came to school anymore. No one knew where they went. This account coincided with the time Brian quit his job and closed his bank account in mid-1998. After 1999, all data regarding Brian and Lydia completely vanished. No more driver's licenses, The Social Security number was deactivated, no taxes filed, and no evidence they left Oregon legally. For Garvey there were only two possibilities. They changed identities again, or one of them was no longer alive. He wrote in his report, "Lydia Harmon is a false identity, created by Brian West for Harper Dalton. Both lived in Knoxville, 1994, then Portland, Oregon, 1995, 1999. No data found after 1999. Suspect they changed names or went into hiding." One detail in the student file caught Garvey's attention in the Guardian section: the handwritten note, Uncle D. Harmon. The handwriting perfectly matched the B. West signature on the Knoxville discharge papers, proving Brian directly raised Harper for many years. He was momentarily stunned when he realized, during the years the entire country forgot the girl from Dawsonville, Harper was still quietly living an ordinary life, bearing another person's name. Garvey and the FBI expanded the search. They cross-referenced hundreds of records of women born around 1980, 1982, who had used the name Lydia or Harmon in immigration files and driver's licenses nationwide. No matching results. Harper seemed to have erased all traces, or someone had helped her do it. That evening, Garvey sat alone in his Portland hotel room, facing a map marking the journey from Georgia to Oregon, a distance of nearly 4,000 kilometers. Each red dot was a year of Harper's life erased from the world: 1993, Dawsonville; 1994, Knoxville; 1996, Portland; 1999, disappeared. He looked intently, then wrote the final line in his investigation notebook. "If Harper is alive, she has another name, another life. But the old wounds will still lead us to her." Garvey believed the girl was still out there, perhaps a grown woman, living quietly under a new name that he himself did not yet know. And for him the Harper Dalton case had never truly closed. In the summer of 2008, police in Bend, Oregon, received an unusual report from a social services center employee. A woman had come in requesting a new identity card, claiming the name Lydia Harmon, born in 1981, with no original identification documents, only submitting a handwritten affidavit of identity. The intake worker noticed something strange about her expression and voice. It seemed to carry a Southern accent. When the photo was cross-referenced in the National Missing Persons Database, NCIC, the system reported a partial match with Harper Dalton, the girl who vanished in Georgia in 1993. Bend police immediately contacted the GBI. Lieutenant William Garvey, upon receiving the call, could hardly believe his ears. After 15 years, the name Harper Dalton had reappeared, in a place over 3,000 miles from Dawsonville. He assembled a special task force and flew to Oregon that week. When they arrived, the woman named Lydia Harmon was living in a small apartment in suburban Bend, working part-time as a server at a local cafe. She was in her mid-20s, with dark blonde hair, a thin build, and a guarded look in her eyes. The police invited her to the station under the pretense of verifying incomplete identity documents. In the interrogation room, Garvey walked in, carrying two old photographs, one of Harper Dalton in 1993, the other the Knoxville hospital photo from 1994. He placed them gently on the table, and asked softly, "Do you know the people in these pictures?" The woman looked down. She did not answer, but her hand trembled slightly. Garvey noted the sign, a reaction that needed no words. He softened his tone. "We just want to make sure you're safe." The technical team proceeded to take facial photographs for comparison with the FBI database. The analysis returned a 97.8% match between Lydia Harmon and Harper Dalton. But for a legal conclusion, they needed DNA or fingerprints. Garvey requested her fingerprints, citing administrative procedure. The result came back just 36 hours later. The fingerprints perfectly matched the school records for Harper Dalton stored at the GBI, since 1993. There was no longer any doubt. Harper Dalton was alive. She remained silent as Garvey read the results, her eyes welling up. "I didn't want anyone to find me again," she whispered. After years of hiding, old memories still frightened her. In his report, Garvey noted, "The reaction indicates signs of prolonged trauma, strong self-protective behavior." In the following days, Harper began to share more. She confirmed that Brian West was the one who took her from Georgia. He told her to call him Uncle David, then changed her name to Lydia Harmon. When her hand was injured, he took her to the Knoxville hospital, and then moved on to Oregon. Harper recounted that in the early years, she was almost completely isolated, not allowed to go to school, not allowed outside, unless he accompanied her. At age 14, when he worked at the lumber mill, she was briefly allowed to enroll in school, under the false name Lydia. In 1999, Brian suddenly left the boarding house. Harper said he promised to return, but he vanished forever. She did not dare report it to the police, afraid of being accused of lying, or being returned to her old life. She left Portland, working odd jobs across the western states, finally settling in Bend, with the identity Lydia Harmon, for the past 15 years. When Garvey asked why she did not try to find her family, Harper simply said, "I'm not Harper anymore. That girl died in 1993. The statement silenced the room. He understood. Before him was a woman who had lived half her life in the shadow of a forgotten 12-year-old girl. The GBI and the FBI coordinated a final DNA verification. The buccal swab sample, collected from Harper, was a 100% match with the DNA sample of her mother, Linda Dalton. The conclusion was formally signed. Case number GBI 9307 reopened. Harper Lee Dalton located alive. Bend, Oregon. When the news broke, all of Dawsonville was stunned. Local media reported, "Missing girl found alive after 15 years. Georgia cold case reopened." Garvey, after years of searching, could finally write 2 words that had never appeared in the file he had kept for 15 years. Found. He met with Harper one last time before flying back to Georgia. She looked at him, a slight but distant smile. "I'm neither grateful nor angry anymore," she said. "I just hope you don't let anyone find me again." Garvey nodded, replying softly, "You've been found now, Harper. The rest is freedom." That night, he returned to the hotel, placing the 1993 photo of Harper next to the new report. The 2 faces, the child and the woman, now merged into one. After 15 years of searching, the Harper Dalton missing person case finally had an ending. The girl from Dawsonville was still alive, bearing the name Lydia Harmon, a person who had lived a whole life to escape her own past. After her identity was confirmed, Harper agreed to cooperate with the GBI and FBI to recount the entire process of her abduction, a story that had been unknown for over 15 years. The interrogation took place in a quiet room at the Bend police station, attended by Lieutenant Garvey and a psychological expert. Harper's voice was small and halting, but every detail she shared silenced everyone present. She said that morning, May 12, 1993, while she was walking to school, a man in a light-colored pickup truck stopped and asked for directions. Harper recognized him as Brian West, the neighboring mechanic who often exchanged greetings with her family. "He said my mom asked him to pick me up for school," Harper recounted. "I believed him because I knew his face." She got into the truck, and that's when everything began. Brian didn't drive to school but turned onto Highway 53, lying that he needed to stop to pick up something. Harper panicked but was calmed by his gentle voice. He drove her to an abandoned warehouse near the woods north of Dawsonville, where he locked her up for the first night. He said, "Your mom is busy, you'll stay here for a few days." The 12-year-old girl at the time didn't understand what was happening, only knowing fear and crying. The next day, Brian forced Harper to change clothes, cut her hair short, and said that from now on her name was Lydia. He began the journey of running, from Georgia to Alabama, then Tennessee. We drove through many small towns, Harper said. He told me I had to remember my new name, my new age. Every time I messed up the name, he got angry. When they arrived in Knoxville, Harper injured her hand when the car door slammed on it, and Brian took her to the hospital under the name Lydia Harmon. Afterward, he rented a small house and made her call him Uncle David. He forbade her from going outside, only allowing her to read books and draw to pass the time. I drew hundreds of pictures, Harper recalled, but he burned them all. A year later, Brian moved them to Oregon. There he lived a normal life as an uncle raising his niece. Harper was allowed to go to school, but under strict supervision. He always came to pick me up, wouldn't let me talk to anyone. If someone asked, I had to say my parents passed away early, and I was living with my uncle. Harper said that in 1996, life changed when a woman appeared, Ruth Calhoun. Ruth was about 40, working for a community organization that helped troubled teens. She came to visit the lumber yard, saw me in the break room, and asked, "Who are you?" I was scared, but she smiled, and said I could stop by the center to read if I wanted. Harper secretly went there a few times. Ruth gave her food, taught her to keep a diary, and sometimes spoke with her privately. She knew I was scared, but never asked directly, Harper said. She just told me, "When you're ready, go." Garvey was stunned when he heard the name Ruth Calhoun. He immediately recognized that it was also the surname of Officer Calhoun, the person who had been in charge of Harper Dalton's file in 1993 in Dawsonville, but who had retired before the case went cold. A random coincidence, or a hidden connection? Harper continued, in the summer of 1999, Ruth disappeared from the center without a word. Around the same time, Brian became anxious, packed his things, and said he would take Lydia somewhere else. But then one morning, he didn't return. Harper stayed alone in the old rental house, waited for many days, and then left. From then on, she lived on the streets, worked in diners, and later moved to Bend. When Garvey asked, "Do you know if Ruth is still alive?" Harper shook her head. After she disappeared, no one said anything more. "I think, maybe she helped me somehow." Garvey suspected that Ruth Calhoun in Oregon might be a relative of, or connected to Officer Calhoun in Georgia. He requested the FBI to check the personal files of both. Initial results showed that Ruth was born in Macon, Georgia, just over 200 miles from Dawsonville, and had worked as an administrative assistant at the Dawsonville Police Department in the early 1990s, before moving to Oregon in 1994. This made everything complicated. Garvey wrote in his report, "If Ruth knew Harper was a victim, why didn't she inform the police? Why did she leave Georgia right after Brian took the girl?" These questions opened up a new avenue of investigation, much more complex than merely finding a missing person. Harper added a description. Ruth had a silver bracelet engraved with the letters CRC. At the time, she didn't understand the meaning. But now Garvey believed it could be the initials for Calhoun, Ruth Carter, which matched the 1992 personnel file. If true, Ruth was not a stranger, but had worked under Officer Calhoun, the person who led the search for Harper that year. The debriefing ended, and Harper sat silently for a long time. "I don't hate anyone," she said. "I just feel tired. But if you find Ruth, tell her that I survived." Garvey watched her through the one-way glass, his mind swirling with the feeling of both closing and opening the case. The disappearance of Harper Dalton was thought to be over, but the name Ruth Calhoun had resurrected another mystery. Did anyone in the force back then know more than they had ever let on? That night, Garvey reopened the old 1993 file, stopping at the handwritten line in the police report, "Calhoun, administrative, received the first anonymous letter." At the same time, in Harper's latest statement, there was also the line, "Ruth Calhoun, the only person who ever told me to go." Two pieces of the puzzle, the same name, two moments separated by 15 years. Garvey understood. The Harper Dalton case was not over, but had just opened to its most mysterious chapter. Immediately following Harper's testimony, Lieutenant Garvey requested the GBI to verify all records concerning Ruth Calhoun. The results stunned him. Ruth was the biological cousin of Sergeant William Calhoun, the officer who had supervised the initial investigation into Harper Dalton's disappearance in 1993. The coincidence had become evidence of a deeper connection. According to her background check, Ruth had worked as an administrative assistant at the Dawsonville Police Department from 1990 to 1993, resigning abruptly 2 weeks after Harper's file was transferred to the GBI. A month later, she left Georgia and settled in Oregon, coinciding with the time Brian West left Dawsonville with Harper. Garvey saw clearly this was no longer a coincidence. The investigative team scrutinized Sergeant Calhoun's finances from 1992-1994. The old bank statements showed 3 cash transfers totaling $12,000 from Brian West's account to a subsidiary account named WC Holdings, matching Calhoun's initials. The money was not listed in tax declarations or police payroll records. Simultaneously, an internal fax sent from Dawsonville to Bend, Oregon, in June 1994, was found, signed, Sergeant C., with the line, "Everything is fine, the file is quiet." The fax trail confirmed it originated from Calhoun's office machine. The GBI and FBI cooperated to open an investigation into bribery, falsification of records, and obstruction of justice. When comparing the Harper case file from 1993, they discovered a series of details that had been altered or deliberately left blank. The witness report, describing the light-colored pickup truck, was classified as unverified. After only 24 hours, and the inspection report of Brian West's home lacked a confirming signature, Garvey and federal agents summoned Calhoun, who had since retired in Gainesville. Faced with the financial evidence, he initially denied the charges, but when the FBI presented a copy of the bank statement with his signature, Calhoun was silent for a long time, before admitting, "I took the money to ease the pressure of the investigation. I thought the girl was dead." According to his statement, in 1993, Brian met Calhoun at a bar, promising a tip to slow down the investigation. Calhoun agreed, believing it was only administrative work. When the case went cold, he thought everything was over, but later learned Ruth was in contact with Brian in Oregon. Fearing exposure, he sent a fax to Ruth demanding silence. The investigation quickly expanded. The internal cover-up network was identified as consisting of 3 people: Sergeant Calhoun, Ruth Calhoun, and an evidence room technician named Mark Dillard, who had handled the backpack and denim scrap evidence. Dillard testified that Calhoun requested to temporarily hold the evidence for additional testing, causing delays in the forensics results, and the case file to be shelved prematurely. The FBI confirmed Calhoun had deliberately falsified records to help Brian West leave Georgia. In return, Brian paid cash through an intermediary account. After he fled, Ruth left the state, possibly out of regret, and later helped Harper escape. When searching Calhoun's home, investigators found an old sealed envelope marked Jessup Case, 1993 inches, the internal code for the Harper case. Inside were copies of crime scene photos, witness reports, not submitted to the GBI, and a handwritten note, "The girl is fine. Has left Georgia." The paper bore a fingerprint matching Calhoun. The investigation results were announced, causing a shockwave across the state of Georgia. Newspapers ran front-page headlines, "Officer linked to 1993, kidnapping cover-up." The people of Dawsonville were stunned to learn that what they thought was a random disappearance had been buried by collusion within the local police force itself. In his report to the GBI director, Garvey wrote, "The Harper Dalton case is not just the journey to find a little girl. It exposes how trust can be betrayed right within the justice system." The FBI issued a decision to prosecute Calhoun for bribery, obstruction of investigation, and destruction of federal evidence. In his confession, he mentioned Ruth, who only wanted to make amends. When Garvey reread the final transcript, he understood it was Ruth, though once a link in the chain of concealment, who broke it by saving Harper in 1996. From that internal darkness, a woman chose to do the right thing, opening a path for the girl to survive and return. And for Garvey, the investigation had now moved beyond the scope of a case. It was a picture of distorted justice, and how people find a way to mend it, even 15 years late. After the internal cover-up network was exposed, Garvey returned to the final objective, tracking down Brian West. All old financial data was reanalyzed. A 1994 bank statement revealed small cash transactions, repeating over many years, transferred through an anonymous account, opened in Greenville, South Carolina, where Brian had lived before leaving Georgia. Although the amounts were small, they were all in 3-month cycles, sent from another account named D. Harmon, matching the fake identity he had used. The GBI collaborated with the FBI to establish a secret operation codenamed Red Bag, named after the color of Harper's red backpack, the first piece of evidence in the case. The goal to determine the whereabouts, arrest and seize all evidence related to Brian West. After 3 months of investigation, the task force identified a man living reclusively in a suburban neighborhood of Greenville, using the name Charles Redding, working maintenance for a small mechanic shop. His build, age and medical records matched Brian's perfectly. He rented a single-story wooden house on County Road 47, near a sparse pine forest, a place easy to retreat to if discovered. On October 14, 2008, Operation Red Bag officially launched. Garvey directly commanded the operation, coordinating with federal agents. At 5 a.m., armored vehicles and SWAT forces surrounded the house. Under the blinding white floodlights, a voice on the loudspeaker boomed, "Charles Redding, this is the FBI, you are surrounded. Come out with your hands up." There was no response. After 3 warnings, the assault team breached the door and stormed in. In the living room, they found a gray-haired thin man sitting in a chair, his hand near a handgun. He did not resist. "You've been a long time coming," he said softly. Fingerprints taken on the spot confirmed Brian Edward West. The search lasted over 6 hours. In the bedroom, police discovered 3 sealed cardboard boxes filled with old papers, fake IDs, along with unexpected evidence. Inside was a thick, leather-bound notebook, covered in scrawled handwriting, "Lydia, Oregon, don't let them know." Furthermore, in a drawer technicians recovered many Polaroid photos of young girls of various ages, some taken in an old pickup truck. One photo showed a red backpack, the very evidence found in a 1993. Garvey flipped through the notebook pages. There were dated entries, recording his travel itinerary throughout the 90s. Atlanta, Knoxville, Portland, Bend. Next to them, short sentences, "The girl is good at drawing." "Rainy night," or "Ruth will worry." Signs that he had maintained contact with Ruth Calhoun after taking Harper. The FBI's digital forensics lab quickly analyzed the old hard drive in his computer, finding an encrypted email sent to Ruth's old address in Oregon in 2000. The content was brief: "She's free now. Don't contact again." The message was sent the exact week Harper recounted that Brian disappeared. During the interrogation, Brian appeared calm, even cold. "The girl is alive. That's enough," he said. When Garvey asked for the reason, he only replied, "I saved her from the others. You wouldn't understand." Although he refused to answer further, the evidence collected was enough to prosecute him for kidnapping, unlawful confinement, and federal document forgery. The Bureau held a press conference after 3 days, confirming that the main suspect in the Harper Dalton case has been arrested in South Carolina. The public was shocked. The man once considered a gentle neighbor was the one who had destroyed a family and caused the case to drag on for 15 years. Garvey was present during the final search. He stood amidst the cluttered room, looking at the Polaroid spread out on the table. All the evidence he had yearned to find was now laid bare, old and tinged with time. In the corner of the last photo, there was a picture of 12-year-old Harper, sitting in the truck, turning her head to look through the window, with dim light illuminating half her face. Garvey sighed, recording in the report. For the past 15 years he kept everything as souvenirs. But the truth cannot be confined forever. Operation Red Bag concluded with a complete result. Brian West was arrested, and all evidence of Harper's abduction journey was safely seized. The case that the entire town of Dawsonville once thought was buried, finally had an answer, not from a confession, but from the photos he kept to remind himself that the little girl had once existed. The FBI interrogation room in Greenville was bathed in cold white light. Brian West sat across from Lieutenant Garvey and Federal Agent Barnes. On the table lay a cold cup of coffee and a thick case file packed with photos, documents, and DNA results. The man, now in his early 50s with graying hair and a dull gaze, maintained a strangely calm composure. Garvey began in a low voice. "You know why we are here. The girl Harper Dalton has returned, and she is alive." Brian looked up, a slight smirk on his lips. "I know, I saw the news," he said. "I rescued her from an alcoholic mother and a family who never wanted her." The statement made Garvey suppress his anger. He placed a photo of a 12-year-old Harper with her mother in 1992 on the table. "The girl didn't need rescuing, she was kidnapped." Brian merely shrugged. "You people don't know. Linda Dalton was drunk all the time. The kid told me. I just took her away from there. I fed her, educated her. She didn't want to go back." Garvey was silent for a few seconds, then pushed the file in front of him. "If that's the case, how do you explain this?" Inside were DNA test results from items found in his home, hair, fibers, and cellular samples that matched Harper Dalton. "This is evidence of confinement, not salvation. And this," he continued, pulling out a copy of the fax Calhoun sent to Ruth in 1994, "proves you had help leaving Georgia. You didn't act alone." Brian's eyes froze. He stared at the words on the fax. "Everything's fine, file's quiet." A tremor briefly ran through his hand. Garvey noticed the hesitation and pressed on. "Who in the force protected you? Calhoun, or someone else?" A minute of heavy silence passed. Then Brian sighed softly. "Not just one person." He recounted that after taking Harper, he panicked when he saw the police searching. "I knew I couldn't run forever," he said. "I called someone I knew from doing repair work on police cars. He said he could handle it, as long as I paid and left no trace. That person was Sergeant Calhoun. Calhoun told him to leave town that very night, promising to keep the files quiet." A week later, Brian received a call from Ruth Calhoun, Calhoun's cousin, telling him to come to Tennessee, where she helped arrange a hideout. "Ruth cared for the girl," Brian said, his voice tinged with weariness. "She told me not to hurt her. I never touched her. I only wanted to keep her away from that mother." Garvey replied coldly. "You confined a child for 6 years, forced her to use a fake name, and cut her off from the world. That is a crime, not kindness." Brian looked down, silent for a long time, then whispered, "There were times I wanted to let her go. But then Ruth disappeared. I was afraid she'd be found, dragged back to her old nightmare. So I kept quiet." Garvey opened his laptop, projecting a current photo of Harper, the girl in her early 20s, with a determined look at her identity confirmation. "She still calls you a kidnapper, and you know what? She survived, not because of you, but in spite of you." Brian looked up at the screen, his gaze empty. Then, seemingly unable to bear the pressure, he sighed. "Fine, call it kidnapping. I won't deny it anymore, but don't say I harmed her. I never wanted to." Barnes recorded every word. Garvey asked further, "Who else helped you after you left Georgia?" Brian hesitated, then said, "It wasn't just Calhoun. There was another person in the evidence room, the one who held on to some of the items. I don't know his real name, just called him Mark." The name matched Mark Dillard, the GBI technician Garvey had previously identified. Brian's testimony aligned with the financial data and disciplinary records they had just collected. After nearly 3 hours, he signed the confession, confirming the entire act of kidnapping and confining Harper Dalton from 1993 to 1999, along with receiving help from individuals within the Georgia police force to leave the state. The document included his final scrawled sentence: "I didn't kill anyone. I just kept the girl safe." As the police escorted him out of the room, Garvey stood looking through the glass window, feeling both relieved and heavy. 15 years of pursuit, and he finally had a confession, but no remorse. That evening, Garvey drafted the indictment with the legal team. The charges listed: kidnapping in the first degree, false imprisonment, falsifying federal documents, and obstruction of investigation. Additionally, the subsidiary case, involving Calhoun's bribery and internal cover-up, would be merged into a special federal file. Before closing the file, Garvey added a lightly shaky handwritten line: "No one saved Harper Dalton. She saved herself, by surviving." Behind the door, Brian West was led away to the clinking of chains. The interrogation concluded, but for Garvey, the fight for justice for the Dawsonville girl had not truly ended, because the truth had many layers, and the darkness within that system had not fully dissipated. In June 2009, the Dawson County Courthouse, Georgia, was packed for the opening day of the trial of Brian Edward West, concluding a 16-year journey. The small town where Harper Dalton vanished now focused its gaze on the courtroom. The defendant, Brian West, sat silently in the dock, his hair gray, his face gaunt. In the row behind, Harper Dalton, now 27, maintained a calm demeanor, but her hands were tightly clasped. Lieutenant William Garvey sat one row behind her, his eyes resolute. The prosecutor rose to speak. "This is the story of a child whose name was stolen, and the man who tried to make the world forget she existed." The defense attorney countered that Brian didn't kidnap, but rescued Harper from a toxic environment, citing his testimony about the alcoholic mother. However, the evidence collected by the GBI and FBI during Operation Red Bag completely refuted this DNA. Polaroid photos, notebooks, and bank accounts all proved Harper was confined for 6 years. Harper Dalton's testimony: on the third day, Harper stepped up to the witness stand. The courtroom air held its breath. Her voice was low but resolute. "He told me my mother didn't want me. I believed it, because I was just a child. For the next 6 years, I lived with a name that wasn't mine." She recounted the journey from Georgia to Tennessee, then Oregon, the years spent under the identity of Lydia Harmon, and the fear of having to pretend to be someone else every day. "I used to think I was dead," Harper said, "but I stayed alive because I knew one day someone would remember I once existed." When asked her reason for coming to court, she looked directly at Brian. "I want my name back. Harper Dalton is still alive." Brian did not respond, only lowered his head, avoiding her gaze. Cheryl West's testimony. The next day, Cheryl West, Brian's ex-girlfriend, took the stand. She tearfully recounted writing the anonymous letter in 1993 to mislead the investigation. "I thought I was helping an innocent person, not knowing I was helping him bury a child," she said. The prosecution presented handwriting analysis evidence that matched perfectly. Despite her honesty, Cheryl still faced legal consequences for obstructing the investigation. Lieutenant Garvey's testimony. Garvey was the final witness. He presented the 15-year process of re-investigation, from the denim scrap, the anonymous letter, to the operation to arrest Brian West. When the prosecutor asked what kept him from giving up, Garvey replied simply, "Because the girl was never found, not just in real life, but in justice." The statement silenced the entire courtroom. Harper bowed her head, tears falling, but a slight smile crossed her face. The verdict. After 2 weeks of arguments, the jury deliberated for only 3 hours. The presiding judge announced the verdict. The jury unanimously finds the defendant, Brian Edward West, guilty of kidnapping in the first degree, false imprisonment, and falsifying federal documents. Brian West was sentenced to life in prison without parole. As he was being escorted away, he briefly glanced at Harper, his eyes empty. Cheryl West received 18 months in prison and 3 years of probation for obstructing a federal investigation, mitigated by her cooperation with the GBI. Sergeant William Calhoun, who had concealed the case, was separately prosecuted in Atlanta federal court. He faced charges of bribery, destruction of evidence, and obstruction of justice, with a maximum sentence of 25 years. In his separate trial, Garvey provided financial and internal facts evidence, proving Calhoun accepted money from Bryan to halt the investigation. Calhoun's trial shocked the entire state. The Georgia Department of Justice requested a review of hundreds of old files. The media called it the case that shook the local police system. Conclusion: Harper did not attend the sentencing. She sent a letter read by the prosecutor in court. "I don't need his apology. I only want the people who helped him to understand that silence is also a crime. I didn't live for revenge. I lived to prove that the truth can prevail, even if it takes 15 years. As the trial concluded, Garvey stood silently before the courthouse door. The afternoon sun stretched across the steps where he had first seen Harper after all those years. When a reporter asked what he thought of the sentence, he simply said, "I don't think this is the end. But at least, Harper has reclaimed her life and her name." That quote spread across Georgia newspapers as the final affirmation of the case that had once been buried. A child returned from the darkness, and justice was finally served. In 2010, the federal court in Atlanta sentenced Sergeant William Calhoun, the man who once led the 1993 Harper Dalton disappearance investigation. His aged face was bowed as the sentence was read: 25 years in federal prison for bribery, destruction of evidence, and obstruction of investigation. The belated confession closed the darkest chapter in Dawsonville police history. That same year, the Harper Dalton case was officially transferred to the solved category in GBI records. Bryan Edward West, the kidnapper, faced additional federal charges for crossing state lines, using false identification, and confining a minor. The trial concluded in September 2010, with a sentence of 40 years in federal prison, without parole. In the sentencing, the judge stated briefly, "You took 15 years of a child's freedom. Now justice takes back the rest of your life." Cheryl West, who sent the anonymous letter and later cooperated with the investigation, received a 6-year sentence, to be served at a women's correctional facility in Alabama. In her final statement, she apologized to Harper and said that the worst thing is not doing wrong, but staying silent when you know you've done wrong. As for Harper Dalton, after the trial, she was transferred to the GBI Witness Protection Program, starting a new life under a different name in the western United States. She studied art and worked for an organization supporting victims of missing persons, always keeping her true identity secret. A few journalists attempted to reach out, but the GBI firmly refused. In the official file, the final note had only 2 words: safe, relocated. In the final press conference about the case, Lieutenant William Garvey appeared with gray hair and a hoarse voice. He announced his retirement after 32 years of service, 15 of which were dedicated to this single case. When reporters asked why he didn't give up, Garvey replied, "Because the truth doesn't die with time, it's just buried under layers of silence." He left the force a few months later, declining all interview requests. However, his and Harper's story was compiled by the GBI into training material for cold case investigation, titled, "The Dalton Case: Patience, Persistence, and Truth." New GBI cadets often begin their first class with an image of the red backpack, the first piece of evidence that led them to the whole truth. In December 2010, the Harper Dalton case file was sealed at GBI headquarters in Atlanta, placed in a specialized archive for solved historical cases. On the file cover, a red stamp clearly read, "Solved, 2008. A year later, Garvey returned to Dawsonville one last time. The town was peaceful. The old gas station where Harper was last seen was now a convenience store. He stopped his car, looked through the window, where everything began. The early winter wind blew gently through the trees, carrying the scent of damp wood and distant traffic. In his old notebook, he wrote the final lines: Harper Dalton, missing 1993, found 2008. Justice does not come quickly, but it comes, and sometimes, surviving is the victory. From this case, many new regulations were issued: stricter evidence preservation protocols, mandatory auditing of all internal finances, and the expansion of the GBI's cold case division. The story of Harper Dalton became a prime example of persistent investigation, even when spanning decades. In 2011, a handwritten letter arrived at the GBI office, with no sender address. The familiar script was soft and neat. "I am well, thank you for not forgetting me." H. Garvey read the letter in silence. He knew it was Harper, and that she had truly stepped out of the darkness. The Dalton case file remains in the archive, beside the red stamp "Solved, 2008. Every year new GBI officers are led down that hallway, where a small plaque is engraved with the words, "Justice sometimes comes late, but never fails." The Harper Dalton case closed, not just as the conclusion of an investigation, but as proof that the truth, however buried, will eventually be named. In today's America, the story Georgia 1993, cold case solved, arrest shocks community, reminds us of the specific things that can truly save people. A red backpack discarded behind a truck stop, a denim scrap identified by FTIR as belonging to a 1989-1992 Ford F-150 Interior, a temporary Tennessee license plate, reflected in a car mirror in a Polaroid photo, or the Lydia Harmon emergency room record in Knoxville, all show that small details, if properly preserved, can become the key after many years. Therefore, in daily life, save messages, photos, receipts, and location data. If you see something unusual, like adults approaching children near schools, gas stations, truck stops, immediately call 911 and accurately describe the car color, temporary plate, and decals. Second, do not dismiss noise like the letter, "Look" by Lake Lanier. False information can delay rescue. Verify sources, prioritize official channels, police, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Third, the story of Ruth Calhoun and Sergeant Calhoun demonstrates the danger of internal cover-ups. In the U.S., citizens have the right to request records, FOIA state, participate in community oversight, and support independent auditing of evidence rooms. Transparency helps prevent tragedy. Fourth, Harper survived by being viewed through a trauma-informed approach. Believe the victim, do not pressure them to tell their story. Prioritize safety and autonomy. Witness protection program. Families with children should set a safety password. Teach their children not to get into a familiar person's car without the password, and know the no-go yell-tell rule. Finally, the persistence of the Cold Case Unit and Red Bag campaign reminds us to support funding for cold case investigations and forensic science. Justice may come late, but only when the community does not give up. In America, where every town has a truck stop and cameras, your attention could be the clue that creates a solved line on some file. If you believe that the truth, no matter how long it has been buried, deserves to be found, please hit subscribe to join us as we continue our journey exploring cold cases across America. Thank you for following the story of Harper Dalton. See you in the next video, where every small detail can illuminate a great truth.